Welcome back to Not So Grand Garage. Today I'm out in the shop, and as you can see, I'm tearing down the front end on the flatbed, and we have a pile of parts to install. So yeah, I gotta tear the knuckles off, steering off. We're gonna take this thing down to a bare housing because we're gonna be replacing gearing. I'm gonna be rebuilding the kingpins, replacing inner axle seals, replacing axle shaft U-joints. That might be it. We'll see. But it's going to be a long day, so let's get at it. So the previous owner, or one of the previous owners of this truck, did me a huge favor. I'm being sarcastic. Of taking a grinder to the caliper mount bracket. Problem is, it's starting to crack, and it's the same on both sides. I have no idea why they thought it was pertinent to do that. When I got this truck, it was sitting on factory 16.5 steel wheels, so I don't know why someone thought it was necessary to grind these brackets down, but from what I can tell, these brackets are nearly impossible to get, so I don't know. I'm gonna have to think on that one for a bit. I don't really want to change the brake design altogether, but in the off-road world there are a couple options. We can run some plate steel brackets and bolt-on calipers from a 3/4 ton Chevy. I need to run the math on it and see if I would lose stopping power going that route. If not, it's probably going to be the route I take. It sucks because I really didn't want to have to spend the money right now to put brakes on this thing too, because the brakes are in decent shape other than the brackets starting to fail. But yeah, I don't know if I want to risk driving on it like that anymore. Then again, who knows how long it's been like that. I knew it was an issue when I put calipers and rotors on this thing and pads when I first got the truck, and I noticed it had been ground down, but I don't recall it being cracked, so I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. Anyways, I'm gonna keep tearing this down and go from there. Gotta knock the steering linkage off of it and get the other side torn down, get these spindles pulled off, and go from there. So I've got both sides torn down. This side feels really tight as far as on the kingpins go, whereas this side feels a lot smoother, moves a lot easier. Doesn't feel loose by any means, but I also noticed on this side there is anti-seize on everything, so I have a feeling that someone has been into this side of the thing at some point. It wasn't me, so I'm not sure. Anyways, I've got everything torn down other than the kingpins, so now I'm ready to pull the front cover and drain the oil if there's any in it. And we'll start first on the gear set, because it's the one thing I'm not looking forward to doing, but we've got the tools, we're gonna figure it out. I got the cover pulled. It was full of oil, and the oil was really clean, so that's good. Went on and spun everything over, just checking for damage, and everything looks clean. Everything moves freely. I don't see anything that just screams issues. So the ring and pinion set that's in this thing right now, it's 410s. I've got a buddy that's getting ready to swap a 410 rear into his truck. So this gear set will be donated to his project, and we're gonna go on and slap the 488s in this one. So next up, I'm gonna mark these caps, mark the top, number them. If they haven't been marked already, I'm gonna check, but that way they don't get twisted around or disturbed. And then we're going to go on and pull this, start and get the pinion pulled out, pull our bearings, and get our shims and everything off. We'll keep track of where everything goes and start setting up the new set. So with a little finesse, got the carrier out, keep the bearings together. They'll pop apart whenever you pull it out. But looks like someone has been in here and at least put interaxle seals in it. But from the looks of everything, I'd say it's possible that someone rebuilt this thing at some point. But everything looks really good. So I'm gonna go on and next up pop the pinion out, and then going to clean this housing up and put axle seals in. Then we will start setting up the gear set, which is something completely foreign to me, but done a lot of research on it, a lot of reading, a lot of video watching. I think we'll be able to handle it. But yeah, I'll keep at it. Okay, been doing a little bit of cleaning, and before I go any further, which I don't have a machinist straight edge, but I'm gonna lay a straight edge across this flange and measure down to the face of this pinion where it's flat. That way, when I go to put the new pinion in, that's gonna give us a good starting point as far as setting it up for our initial pattern. So when I put it together, when I set the pinion depth the first time, I'm gonna try and get it as close to this measurement that I take now as possible. And hopefully that will get us real close on our pattern right off the bat. It might not, but it'll give us a good starting point anyways. But yeah, I'm gonna do that before I pull the pinion. Like I said, just gonna run a straight edge or something relatively straight from here to here, measure down with my calipers to this face. I'm gonna jot that down and set the new pinion up the same way. We are at 5.275. So that will get us pretty close. So when I set the pinion in, the new pinion, I'm going to do the same thing, measure across here, set this up to 5.275 from the face of the new pinion. Hopefully that'll get us in the ballpark of where we need to be for our pattern. We'll run a pattern and then we'll adjust as we need to. I will be making setup bearings. The shims on this will not be on the pinion, they'll be in the case behind the race. So when I pull this race out, I'll shave it down so it slides in and out of the case really easy, so I can adjust those shims easy. And yeah, we'll go from there. So I'm gonna go on and get this pinion pulled out and go from there. Now if you watched the video when I rebuilt the 44A in the back of my Turbo Grand Cherokee, you'll have seen this process before. Got this bearing puller. This was a cheapie off Amazon. So far it has worked great. So we'll go on and use it to pull the bearings off the carrier and the pinion once I get it pulled out, which is the next step. So getting everything laid out, trying to keep everything organized and clean as I can. And like I said, there are shims underneath these bearings, so we're going to be careful. We want to reuse these shim stacks, or at least I'm going to use those at a starting place, because the bearing preload is right. So we may have to adjust that either way to get our backlash set right, but that's later. That's final step. But we'll use these bearing or these shims just as they are underneath our new bearings. Well, underneath the setup bearings as we're putting everything together to test our pattern, and we'll adjust as needed. But yeah, keep going. Got our pinion out. Note, there's a shim here. This is preload shim. There is a bearing and an oil slinger. That is it. From here, we go up into here, and we've got the races and the outer pinion bearing still in place, pinion seal. As you can see, or you might be able to see, this right here, it is an oil diverter of sorts. It's to help keep that front pinion bearings lubricated. Needs to be in place, and I'm likely going to destroy it on the way out because it is pressed in behind that race. Now, I'm not sure if my kit came with one. If not, I'll have to order one. I've got stuff over here. I need to open this up. It looks like I've got an oil slinger here. I may have another one in here. I'm not sure yet. It looks like I may have one there. If that's the case, that will be great. But anyways, we're gonna keep going and get this torn apart. So we got everything out of the housing. Here is that oiler that I knew I was going to destroy, and there's a couple shims which came out easy, and then the race for the pinion bearing. This is the outer pinion bearing race and bearing. So yeah, everything's out. I'm gonna finish cleaning up the housing here in a little bit, but for now I'm going to pop open the rebuild kit. I'm going to take the races for both the pinion bearings and take them inside, put them in the freezer, and probably going to stop for lunch. And hopefully by the time I'm ready to put it back together, they will be cold enough to make the process a lot easier. So yeah, we'll see. I've got bearing drivers and race drivers and all that stuff, so it's not a huge deal, but it does make it go a lot easier if you can freeze the races and come time heat the housing up a little bit. They'll almost drop in place without having to beat on them. But yeah, so I'm gonna do that, go eat lunch, and we'll be back out here and hopefully get started setting this up. I've got to pull the pinion bearing off, the inner pinion bearing off, and that one we can go on and just press the new one on. I don't even know that I need to take it off of that one. We can just press the new bearing on to the new pinion because the inner has no shims or anything under it. It just has that oil slinger. So we'll put the new oil slinger on, press the new bearing on. That'll be ready to go. And then we'll make a setup bearing for the outer pinion bearing. We'll make the carrier bearings into setup bearings. And yeah, we should be on the way to getting this done. Slowly but surely. So we're getting ready to go on and start setting up the new pinion. We're going to set it up exactly like the old pinion is set up. This here mic'd out at 30 thousandths, which is the same as the original. So this will go on first, and then our pinion bearing, our inner pinion bearing, will press on first. Then we'll be able to go on and start putting it in the housing. I'll have to set the outer race can go on and be set in place permanently with the new one, but I do need to set up this outer bearing as a setup bearing. I want it to slide on and off this pinion real easy. But other than that, the inner race is the part I'm going to make into a setup race. So yeah, other than that, we should be pretty good to go. Here is our inner bearing, which these are all Koyo bearings. Good bearing. It should slide right down there. And then when I set it up in the press, we need to be absolutely sure that we're going to press on this inside collar of the bearing. Do not make contact with the cage because you'll destroy it. I may go on and pull this bearing apart and cut it out and use the bearing to press this bearing on. I've done that in the past and it works really well, but we'll see. Usually that's what I'll do with the setup bearings when I'm done, when everything's set up. Like as far as when I rebuilt the 44A, I didn't change gearing, so I didn't have to reshim anything. But when I was ready to press the new bearings on, I took my setup bearings, cut the cages off of them, and used just the inner parts of the bearing to function as a sleeve to press the new bearing on to keep from damaging it. But yeah, I'll go on and set this up in the press and get this bearing pressed on, and we'll go from there. So my setup bearings from when I did the 44A look like they will fit right over this bearing and put pressure just on the inside edge. And they're big enough on the ID where they won't get stuck. So I'll use these to press this bearing all the way in place. Should work out really well. So I got a new bearing pressed on. Everything went smoothly. It is set up just like the factory Pinion, which I did go on just to verify. I went on and pulled the bearing and made sure there was no shims or anything other than this oil slinger under the bearing. We're good there. So next up is I need to get the outer pinion bearing race pressed into the housing. That's no big deal. It's in the freezer currently. And I need to take the grinder to the inner race, the outside edge. We're going to shave this down where it slides into the housing easy. Snug, but slides in and out easy. So we can use this to change our shims and it'll make it a lot faster. It's pretty well a must on that because if you have to drive it in and out, you're gonna end up destroying shims, destroying your oil slingers and all that stuff. So yeah, I'm gonna go in and get the outer race out of the freezer, get it driven in, then I'll turn this one down and turn it into a setup race. So I got a new outer race driven in. It was in the freezer for an hour or so, maybe a little longer. And I did not have a driver the right size, so I went on and took the old outer race, turned it down on the outside edge so it wouldn't hang up, and used this along with my seal drivers to drive it in, and it worked beautifully. So now I need to turn down. Oh. I'm gonna hang on to all these. Speaking of, when you make these, just throw them in a box or a bag, tag them what they are, and you'll have them. So, anywho, now I need to take the inner race, turn it down so it slides in and out of the housing real easy, and we can start setting up our pinion depth and preload. Once those two are set up, everything else is a breeze. So here is our inner pinion race. Patience and a grinder, 4.5-inch grinder with a flapper wheel on it. And here is what we're after. We want a snug fit, right? But as long as it goes in straight, it'll drop in by hand. And you can take it in and out by hand, but there's no play in the housing. So this will let us reset these shims that go behind it really easy. It'll make this job go a lot faster. So I already mic'd our oil restrictor. They are identical, they're 18 thou compared to the old one. These are the shims that came out. I'm going to start with these. I'm going to reuse these. So we're gonna put this in the housing, right? The hat goes towards the outside of the housing, so towards the pinion nut. This is the direction this goes. Our shims, and then we'll put our actually I think this goes behind the shims. I'll have to look and double check before I fully assemble it. But then this goes in behind this race, all right? So I'll have it set up something like this in the housing. Then we can go on and set our pinion in place. I still need to, before I can do any of this, I need to clean up this bearing and grind out this inside so it is then a slip fit onto the pinion. So that'll make it a lot easier to set our preload and all that, be able to take it apart and everything a lot easier. So I'm gonna go on and do that with just a carbide burr bit by hand, and yeah, then we'll start setting this pinion up. So I got our outer setup bearing made, as you can see. Slides right on, off by hand. All I did was open this inside diameter up a little bit. That's all you need to do. So now we can drop this in. I'm going to start with the shims right off of this, which this here is preload shims, right? This sets the bearing preload, like so. Just like a wheel bearing, those shims adjust the gap between these bearings and these bearings. They're opposed tapered bearings, just like a wheel bearing would be. I'm gonna set this in place, and I will use the old pinion nut and washer, no seal or anything. We'll set it in place, run it down snug, not super tight, just snug, and see where our preload's at and go from there. So I got our pinion in and our yoke put back on, snug down. So now we're gonna check our preload. And all we're using here is a bar type torque wrench. Nothing fancy. I may need to do this with an empty hand here. Looks like we're about 25 once it starts moving, which is a little on the snug side. Yeah. So we were too tight initially. I added a shim and we are too loose. So I'm going to pull that back out, mic the shim I added, and we're going to half that and see where that gets us. So I've still got our setup bearings and everything in. After a few changes on the shim stack, we're sitting at 20 inch-pounds. Spec is between 17 and 30 for new bearings, so I'm on the lower side of the spec, which is a good thing because one of those bearings is used. So when I throw another bearing in there, that's going to tighten that up just a little bit more. So we're going to leave that for now. Next up, we're going to measure from the flange to the face of the pinion, see how close we are there. If we're close, we'll go on and swap these gears out on the carrier and make our setup bearings for that. Go on and put it in and run our first pattern to see where we're at. So I just checked our pinion depth from the face flange like I did initially, which, keep in mind, not a machinist square, and the straight edge was pretty flexible. I'm within 10 thousandths right now of that initial measurement, so I'm gonna leave it and go on and swap a ring gear over and change or modify these bearings into setup bearings. We'll set the carrier back in place and see where we're at on a test pattern. So we got the carrier back in with the new ring gear on it. Now we are ready to get our first test pattern. Again, that is with setup bearings and with the original shims in place. The preload was good. The backlash feels close, but we'll measure it to be sure. It's close enough to get us a test pattern on real quick anyways, and we'll see how things look from there. So here's our first pattern. Might be hard to see on camera, but it's a pretty sharp line on the bottom, and it's rounded at the top, and we've got a pretty good line here as far as paint showing at the top of the tooth. So our pinion is slightly too deep, so we need to pull it back out and I believe remove a shim, or we're going to calculate that out, figure out how much we need to pull out, slap it back together, and check again. So we're back out in the shop, and you know, new day. I'm looking at this pattern, and I went on and reran the pattern through a drill on the chuck, or I threw a drill on the yoke and spun this thing a few times. And here's our pattern we're getting currently, which is kind of hard to see, but yeah, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see it or not. The pattern is oval shaped, which is what we're looking for. There's no sharp lines at the top or bottom of the tooth. So I think our pinion depth is really close, if not on. I did go on and measure our gear backlash, and we're at like 14 thousandths right now, which is too high. So I'm going to pull the carrier back out, adjust the backlash a bit, which we need to bring this towards the pinion a bit. So I'm going to pull the caps, take this down. I will take a shim out of this side and put it over into this side, because we don't want to change the preload. The preload is good. So that should bring the ring gear closer to the pinion, tightening that backlash up. It won't take much, and then we'll put it back together and rerun the pattern and make sure we're good. If everything still looks good, we will pull everything apart, knock new axle seals in, and press on our new bearings and put it all back together. Run one last test just to make sure nothing changed, which some things will with newer bearings. The good thing is that I'm pretty certain this front end had been gone through, because the bearings and everything looked brand new. So it is what it is. I don't think it'll change our patterns much at all, though, as far as that goes. So we're going to keep at it. I'm going to tear this back down, switch some shims around, and keep going. So after a little bit of back and forth, don't know if you'll be able to see the numbers or not, but we got it sitting right at 6 thousandths, maybe 6.5, which is good. So probably easier to see from the yellow transfer onto the gear tooth. We've got a good pattern from what I can see on both sides of the tooth now. So we're gonna run it. Now, is it perfect? Well, I don't know, because this is the first setup I've done. So we're gonna leave it be. It's also in a front axle that's not going to be used very often. So is it as critical? Probably not. But yeah, I'm gonna go on and pull everything back apart. I'm gonna put new axle seals in, the inner axle seals, get our setup bearings pulled off, press on our new bearings, and hopefully go back together for the last time. So I've got everything back apart, and I got the housing cleaned up, got all the setup bearings or setup races pulled out of the housing. Now we're ready to start putting it back together for the final time. So I've got this oil restrictor or what have you. I think that's what it's called, but it's required. Now I did not have this in place while setting everything up. All I did was mic its thickness and replace it with shims, so it would we'd still get the correct depth setting on the pinion while we were setting everything up, but a lot less chance of tearing this up with pulling the pinion in and out of the housing so many times. So I'm going to replace the shims that I put in place with this. Then we will install our inner pinion bearing race, which is still in the freezer, and I'm going to go in and get it as soon as I get these set in place, and hopefully it'll drop right in. If not, I'll use the setup race to drive it in. So got our stack ready, pulled 19 thousandths worth of shims out because that's how thick our restrictor is. So now this is how this goes in the housing. So the hat side, the protruded side, goes in first. Then you've got the shims on top, and then the race goes in over top of all of that. So we're gonna go on and set these in place. I'm gonna go on and get the race out of the freezer and drop it in, hopefully for the last time. Got our shims and oil restrictor put in place. And there we go. New inner race is installed with the shims behind it and the oil slinger behind that. So now we can start putting the pinion in for the final time. Now with putting that in the freezer for several hours, it did still require a little bit of tapping. You can heat the housing up. Some people do that. With all the brake cleaner and stuff I've been spraying in this thing recently, I'm not going to do that. So I just used my setup race and my seal driver and tapped it in. It didn't take much effort. So that'll warm up and that will not come out. Will be good. So next up is to clean up the pinion and go on and slide it in place. And yeah, get our outer pinion bearing, our new one, ready to go on, as well as the pinion seal and all that fun stuff. Well, we are back together for hopefully our last test. We'll say that when I put the pinion back in, the new bearing on the outside, because it's kind of a press fit, that's one that we made a setup bearing for, that changed the preload. So I had to go back in and reshim for preload. But other than that, I didn't change anything. So the depth, pinion depth should be the same, and the backlash, which it's good with the carrier back in place, it's the same. So our tooth pattern should be the same. So we're gonna run it and make sure. I've got a socket adapter in my drill, so I'm gonna run it both directions, several rotations at speed, and we'll take a look at the pattern, see what it looks like. Our pattern looks the same. So finally, I am going to go through, torque these caps, torque the pinion nut, which I might spin it off, put a little Loctite on it because I had to remove it once before. So run that back down, and then we will start on the kingpins, which is a whole nother project in and of itself. So we're gonna call this one part 1, and we will be doing the kingpins in part 2. That way, if anyone needs to see something specific with all this, they'll be able to find it a little easier. So with that said, I'm gonna wrap this one up. If you got any comments, complaints, questions, drop them in the comment section below. No, I am not a gear guy. I'm not a professional. I am 100% winging this, but we got it within spec, and from what I can see and from everything that I've read, the gear pattern is decent enough. So yeah, I'm sure I'll get some comments in the comment section. That's fine. But with that said, if you would hit that thumbs up button, helps us out quite a bit. Doesn't cost you anything. If you want to support the channel, we've got a PayPal account set up. Link to that's in the video description, as well as a link to the website, www.notsograndgarage.com, for our merch, black diesel gear. You know the drill. With that said, if you haven't already, please subscribe. We appreciate you watching.